fellow lovers of the liminal and the weird, and welcome to another video by Liminal Spaces. Today I am excited because we are going to do a deep dive into the Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham. Now, I had heard, before I was a booktuber, I was a fan of booktube. I loved especially watching Sci-fi booktube. And this writer came up often, and it's one that people really placed in high regard. So I made sure to find and keep as many novels of his that I could. And the book that people talked mainly about was The Day of the Triffids. And from what I could get from these mentions and videos of having watched the Day of the Triffid videos on BookTube, and this has been a long time ago, was that it was some kind of an invasion of plant-like creatures. I don't even know if that's true anymore, but that was kind of what I got. And for me, that didn't hook me as much as I wanted it to. So I collected John Wyndham, but he was not high up on my list of TBR. There was people that I was getting to for him. And then Richard Rempel made a video about some recent John Wyndham re-releases. Great video. I'll put a link to it down in the description. You should give it a look. The covers that he shows are worth it 100%. And I realized I had to give Wyndham a try. So many people have talked about how great Wyndham is that I had to do it. And I went on my shelf, and I did not have Day of the Triffids, but I did have the Midwich Cuckoos, and I was familiar with Village of the Damned. So I kind of knew the concept, but to me, the idea of this book seemed a lot more interesting than The Day of the Triffids. I don't know if that's true. I'm going to read Day of the Triffids next year sometime, and I'll be able to compare them. But this is the one I chose, mainly because it's the most famous one that I had, and also because I really liked this idea. And then we'll start with the title, The Midwich Cuckoos. Midwich is a town. I hope I'm saying it correctly. But the choice of cuckoos, who are, what do they call it? I can't remember. There's a scientific term for this, but cuckoos lay their eggs in other birds' nests. And they hatch, and they grow bigger and more quickly than the birds in whose nests they've laid these eggs. So all of the mom's resources go towards the cuckoo, who is not even her child. And then the cuckoo will kick the other eggs out of the nests, or if they're already hatched, they'll slowly kick the other birds out of the nest. So basically, they steal the mom's affection and love and feeding and resources, and the mom ends up raising a bird that is not even her own, even as her own children suffer. Wild concept. I assume this is the concept that John Wyndham learned that made him think of this incredible story for this novel. But yeah, what a title. Great title. I'm shocked that some of the movies changed the name to Village of the Damned, which is a fine title, but nowhere near as interesting as the Cuckoo's title, in my opinion. I really love the title of this novel. So I've already made a review video for this book, in which I start to break down the beginning of this novel. So if you haven't watched that already, go give that a watch and come back and watch this. I am going to restate what I said over there, but I'm going to do it much quicker here. This novel opens up with a couple returning from a vacation to their town of Midwich. And the couple's name is Richard Gayford and his wife Janet. And Richard is our narrator of this story, and I think that John Wyndham chose him because he was removed from the events, because he and his wife happened to be out of town when this happens. And the story even opens with Richard saying, "Oh, Janet, we are so lucky that my birthday landed on this specific day so that we could be out of Midwich when all of this happened," because they went out to London to celebrate his birthday. So he is the narrator, and I think he was chosen because he could kind of look at things from a completely biased perspective, because he's back from the events, because they weren't there when all of this went down. Although we do have a tendency to not stay very close to him through psychic distance in these stories, or in this novel, as other characters. It's strange because he's our narrator, and in the end I think I know less about him than most of the other characters in the novel. But anyway, they're returning home from this vacation. They come to Midwich, and the town is blocked off by police and military. They ask what's going on, and the person tells them, oh, there's some military exercises going on. Go ahead and turn around and go back to the town, Tarn, I think it's called. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Turn around and go back to that town, get a hotel, and I will call the hotel and let you know when Midwich is open again. They decide this is insanity and they just want to get home. So they go around some back roads and decide to park the car and walk across fields into Midwich proper. So they're walking across these fields, and as they're walking, they see somebody in military outfit many fields over waving to them, yelling, no, no, no. And Janet's like, oh, he'll never catch us. And she runs towards Midwich, and as she's running, she suddenly just kind of folds over and falls down on the ground, which of course freaks out Richard, and freaked me out as well. And he runs over there, but before he can make it, he blacks out. The next couple of chapters, we get people trying to understand and get into Midwich. So basically everybody in Midwich fell asleep at the exact same time. I believe it was 10:17. Everybody fell asleep at the exact same time. So nobody can get a hold of Midwich. To make matters worse, like, the mailman tries to go in and he falls asleep at the wheel and kind of, drives off the road and hits a curb. The bus goes in, same thing happens. A constable or a policeman try to go into town on a bike, same thing happens. Anybody that crosses a certain line passes out. So the military is trying to figure this out, and they have a canary in a cage at the end of a pole, and they're popping this canary in and out. So the canary's like falling asleep, waking up, falling asleep, waking up, and then they are able to see that the line is a perfect circle all the way around the town. There's this perfect circle. And they try to fly somebody over, and I think one plane goes down, but the other one gets a shot. And they see that in the center of this circle is a circular metal object, which is by a research center that they had near Midwich called the Grange. And it looks like this huge structure, and they're like, there's no way that could have been built overnight. What is that? That's so strange. And of course, most of us know the story here, and I would highly recommend that when you read this, you put aside everything you know and allow yourself to be surprised by this plot as it comes. But I think that it was really brilliant the way that John Wyndham did this, because we all know what that circular metal object is in the center of the sphere. We can all figure that out, but I won't go there just yet. But the reason I bring it up is because John Wyndham, this is it. This is the only little hint you get. That's it. Right there. That's what the entirety of the story is based on, is in that one little hint. And that is way more than enough. It's really brilliant. So they figure out that it's a hemisphere. They never say sphere, but I assume if you dig down that it would be a sphere. The metal object by the Grange is creating a sphere, but who knows? Maybe it's just a hemisphere. But they're still studying it. They're trying to figure out how high up it goes, when suddenly everybody in Midwich wakes up. And after a couple of days of tests and everything else, they realize that everybody's okay. Everybody's just fine. And there are no answers. And this is kind of a Kafkaesque thing that John Wyndham did really well, in the sense that everybody wakes up and has no answer to this terrifying event that has occurred. But because there's no answer, they just kind of have to ignore it and go on with their lives, which is really strange, but I think would kind of be the answer. I mean, what can you do? And of course, a lot of people might say, well, no, the government would be like all over this. And that is valid. There is a unique way that the government decides to handle this specific situation in the Midwich Cuckoos, in that Richard, who's kind of our absentee narrator, is friends with a person that is in the military and kind of high up in the government named Bernard. And Bernard asks Richard to continue living in Midwich like he's been doing, but keep an eye on everything, just so that the government is well aware of what's happening. So Richard kind of becomes a spy for the government in Midwich, because the government is in kind of the same position as the people, and they're like, that was really weird. We don't know what any of it means, right? There's nothing that they can really do. And of course, they have the Grange, which is right there by Midwich. And the people in the Grange are able to continue to study Midwich and all that had occurred there during what they term now the day out. So instead of a blackout, they call it a day out, that everybody was out for a day in Midwich. So Midwich goes on, and then slowly, first we're introduced to a person named Zellaby, who's an old scholar. He's presented, I think, as being incredibly smart and brilliant, a writer of academic texts, but in his age has started to run on in his conversations, and he just kind of goes off on tangents that confuse people that are trying to talk to him in a day-to-day basis. And his second wife, Angela, who is younger than him, I think she's 40 in the book, and he's older than that. And then they have a daughter, but it's Angela's stepdaughter. She's from Zellaby's first marriage, and her name is Farrellyn. And Farrellyn is engaged to a man named Alan, I believe his name was, who is in the military and is away. He comes and sees her every now and again, but he is away in the military doing training and so on and so forth. And we learn that these two women are pregnant. Zellaby and Angela, I think, either were trying to get pregnant. I can't remember. I've also watched all the movies and all the media on this, so a lot of stuff is mixed together. But they both admit that they're pregnant, and it's a little bit rough for Farrellyn because she is engaged and not married and is very, very confused. And then we slowly begin to realize that every woman in Midwich that's of birthable age is pregnant. And some of these women that are pregnant are young. Some are virgins. But it's such a private thing that none of the women that are ashamed by their state really come forward. They're confused and they're terrified, and there's suicide attempts. And Zellaby slowly begins to put together the fact that most of these pregnancies happened during the day out. And through Zellaby talking to Richard, this eventually gets back to Bernard, who is the government guy, and they realize they have a bit of a crisis on their hands, and they need to somehow tell the town what is happening. And this is really wild, because when you really sit down and think about this book, this is a terrifying concept, especially for women. The violation of suddenly carrying something in your body that you don't remember how it came to be is terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And I really loved the way that John Wyndham tackled this, because what he eventually did is had Angela step in, and there's this town hall meeting, and Angela gives this speech that says, look, we don't know how this occurred. We don't know who the parents of these kids are, and they don't really get into that yet. That's talked about later in the book. Sorry. We don't know how these pregnancies occurred. What we do know is that they did, and that wives whose husbands may have been out of town for a very long time are suddenly pregnant. And girls that have never known love are suddenly pregnant. And that in this specific situation, we as a town are going to have to jettison all traditional ideas about pregnancy, about conception, and about all these other things. We have to destroy all prejudices, because this is not the fault of the women that it happened to. And this, to me, was presented in a almost comedic, kind of surrealistic way, where the biggest thing to overcome is not the fear of whatever happened to them on the day out, but the fear of society's reaction to being unexplainably pregnant. And I think that Wyndham was using this concept to make quite an awesome statement in 1957 that perhaps our concepts of how we deal with people and who they choose to be with and whether or not they conceive is not really the business of anyone but the women involved. It was really well done, and Angela's speech is all written out, and it's really, really well done. I really enjoyed this section of the book. That's the first hurdle they have to get over, is to stop young women who have never been in love or had sex that are now pregnant from killing themselves, because society will look at them as ruined from that point on, which is absolutely ridiculous. So they get over that hurdle. Everybody has to accept that they are in a situation that makes no sense, that there is no explanation from it, and move on from there. And then the gestation period of these children is super fast, right? They're much farther along physically than they should be for the amount of months that pass. Yeah, so this is a quote where Angela is expressing her emotional state concerning the entire situation, being pregnant and not knowing what exactly is in her body. She's more worried than she has let us see. It came out a couple of nights ago, nothing particular to start it. I happened to look up and found her staring at me as though she were hating me. She doesn't, you know. Then, as if I had said something, she broke out. It's all very well for a man. He doesn't have to go through this sort of thing, and he knows he never will have to. How can he understand? He may mean well as a saint, but he's always on the outside. He can never know what it's like, even in a normal way. So what sort of an idea can he have of this? Or how it feels to lie awake at night with the humiliating knowledge that one is simply being used, as if one were not a person at all, but just a kind of mechanism, a sort of incubator, and then go on wondering, hour after hour, night after night, what it may be that one is being forced to incubate. Of course you can't understand how that feels. How could you? It's degrading. It's intolerable. I shall crack soon. I know I shall. I can't go on like this much longer. Beautifully said by Angela, discussing the horror of what this all really means. And this is kind of a pinnacle of the pregnancy phase of this novel, where they're all pregnant. They don't know what is in their wombs, what they can expect to come out, and they're all absolutely terrified, and Angela says it best there. Soon after this, the babies are born, and they are all born very normal and healthy, but there's a few strange things. Number one, they have slightly different nails and different hair follicles, like not the follicles, but the hair itself is strange. It's not any animal hair or human hair that's been seen before. Their nails are narrower than humans, and their skin kind of has this silvery sheen to it. Also, they're all light-haired. So time goes on, and they have these infants. And like I said, they have some kind of weird stuff going on with them, but they are human in appearance, and so the mothers are able to take care of them. But then one day, all the mothers who have left since this occurred with their children return to Midwich. And we are seeing this through Farrellyn, the daughter of Zellaby. So Angela had a child, and I think Angela's child turned out to actually be Zellaby's baby. I don't think Zellaby's wife's baby was actually one of the children with a capital C, but his daughter did have one of the children. So she went away with her husband Alan, and they were living outside of Midwich, and she comes back and explains that she had no choice. The baby forced her to come back. And this, of course, makes no sense to anybody that hears it. And there's a doctor that works at the Grange, which is the research facility there, who says, no, this is mass female hysteria. They were all so stressed by what has happened that they feel like the babies have control over them, but of course the babies don't really have control of them. It's just these crazy women. At which point, Janet, the wife of our kind of disappeared narrator Richard, writes a letter to Bernard, who is the government person that's having Richard and Janet spy on the town, and says, look, this concept that this is just female hysteria is ridiculous. These are smart women that have returned, and a lot of them had no plan to do so. You must study this. This must be studied. There is something going on with these children. So slowly people come to accept the concept that these children are able to exert telepathic influence over others. And there's a good example of this. I'm going to read it right now. It's on page 94 in the Penguin. So Zellaby is taking a stroll. Not until he was approaching the green did his attention turn outward, and then it was caught by Miss Brinkman, still at some distance. One moment she was hurrying along towards him behind a new and shiny perambulator. The next she had stopped dead, and was looking down into it in a helpless, troubled fashion. Then she picked the baby up and carried it the few yards to the war memorial. There she sat down on the second step, unbuttoned her blouse, and held the baby to her. Zellaby continued his stroll. As he drew near, he raised his somewhat ramshackle hat. An expression of annoyance came over Miss Brinkman's face, and a suffusion of pink, but she did not move. Then, as if he had spoken, she said defensively, "Well, it's natural enough, isn't it?" "My dear lady, it's classical, one of the great symbols," Zellaby assured her. "Then go away," she told him, and abruptly began to weep. Zellaby hesitated. "Is there anything I can—" "Yes, go away," she repeated. "You don't think I want to make an exhibition of myself, do you?" she added tearfully. Zellaby was still irresolute. "She's hungry," Miss Brinkman said. "You'd understand if yours was one of the day-out babies. Now will you please go away?" This is a perfect symbol for what is, I think, going on in this part of the novel, in the sense that these children are not human. They only know that when they need something, they need to force their mothers or caregivers to give it to them in the reflexive way that they know how, which is through control. Therefore, when a day-out baby is hungry, the mother stops and breastfeeds no matter where she is. even though this wasn't considered the norm socially at the time. And this woman is embarrassed and angry because Zellaby's hanging around trying to figure out what's going on, and thinking about, how classical the beauty of a mother feeding her child is. And this poor woman's just like, dude, F off. I've got a day out, baby. They're the damn worst. And I really like that John Wyndham was able to kind of think about this and put this together and give us such a strong, analogous image of what this would be like for the women that had to raise these babies, because the men are often in this novel standing around philosophizing, and they're smart. They're super smart. Zellaby is a fantastic character, and he really tries to understand the children, but Wyndham points out over and over again, especially in this beginning part, how all the weight of this occurrence is on these women, and they are constantly in terror of their own children, and wondering if those children are even their children. It's really scary, and Wyndham does a good job showing that. So it turns out then that none of the mothers can really leave Midwich. None of the babies will allow the mothers to leave, even if they're just going, one town over to shop. The babies won't have anything to do with it. And Zellaby has a conversation with his son-in-law, Alan, and says, look, Alan, you need to get Farrellyn and you need to get out of here. Let me take care of my grandbaby, who's one of the children that won't allow the mothers to leave. He says, you guys just go and we'll take care of the babies. And there's another quote I want to read for that. This is on page 106 in the Penguin. So he's trying to convince Alan to convince Farrellyn to leave the baby. And this is Zellaby going on with his speech. And it isn't really her baby either, or I'd not be talking quite like this. Farrellyn and the rest are the victims of an imposition. They have been cheated into an utterly false position. Some kind of elaborate confidence trick has made them into what the veterinary fellows call host mothers, a relationship more intimate than that of the foster mother, but similar in kind. This baby has absolutely nothing to do with either of you, except that, by some process not yet explained, she was placed in a situation which forced her to nourish it. So far is it from belonging to either of you that it doesn't correspond to any known racial classification. Even Willers has to admit that. But if the type is unknown, the phenomenon is not. Our ancestors, who did not have Willers' blind faith in the articles of science, had a word for it. They called such beings changelings. None of this business would have seemed as strange to them as it does to us, because they had only to suffer religious dogmatism, which was not so dogmatic as scientific dogmatism. The idea of the changeling, therefore, far from being novel, is both old and so widely distributed that it is unlikely to have arisen or to have persisted without cause and occasional support. True, one has not encountered the idea of it taking place on such a scale as this, but quantity does not, in this case, affect the quality of the event. It simply confirms it. All these 61 golden-eyed children we have here are intruders, changelings. They are cuckoo children. Now, the important thing about the cuckoos is not how the egg got into the nest, nor why the nest was chosen. The real matter for concern comes after it has been hatched. What, in fact, will it attempt to do next? And that, whatever it may be, will be motivated by its instinct for survival, an instinct characterized chiefly by utter ruthlessness. Making a jump here to the bottom of page 107 in the Penguin, continuing on with the concept of cuckoos. But of course, that's how it works. That's why the poor hen works herself to death feeding the greedy cuckoo chick. It's a form of confidence trick, as I told you, the callous exploitation of a natural proclivity. The existence of such a proclivity is important to the continuation of a species, but after all, in a civilized society, we cannot afford to give way to all the natural urges, can we? In this case, Farrellyn must simply refuse to be blackmailed through her better instincts. And all those concepts about cuckoos, of course, connects to the title of the book and the analogy of this entire invasion concept. And for me, this is one of the things that really makes this book interesting, is that it's not only a great idea book, but it's also a really philosophical book that Wyndham has considered the great idea that he came up with, but also is considering what that idea entails philosophically, which I think is really brilliant. So this next quote is dealing with a scientist from the Grange that happened to be inside the dome when all this went down, leaving the Grange and her child behind. "One of the afflicted?" Alan inquired. "Yes, and one of the most resentful," Angela said. "Now she's made up her mind to beat it and gone, leaving Midwich holding the baby, literally." "But where do you come in, my dear?" Zellaby inquired. "Oh, she just decided I was a reliable subject for official notification. She said she'd have rung Mr. Krim, but he's away today. She wanted to arrange about the baby. Where is it now?" "Where she was staying, in the older Miss Dory's cottage, and she just walked out on it?" "That's it. Miss Dory doesn't know yet. I'll have to go and tell her." "This could be awkward," Zellaby said. "I can see a pretty panic starting up among the other women who've taken these girls in. They'll all be throwing them out overnight before they get left in the cart too. Can't we stall? Give Krim time to get back and do something? After all, his girls aren't a village responsibility, not primarily. Anyway, besides, she might change her mind." Angela shook her head. "Not this one, I think. She's not done it on the spur of the moment. She's been over it pretty carefully. In fact, her line is, she never asked to come to Midwich. She was simply posted here. If they'd posted her to a yellow fever area, they'd be responsible for the consequences. Well, they posted her here, and through no fault of her own, she caught this instead. Now it's up to them to deal with it." Said Zellaby. "One has a feeling that parallelism is not going to be accepted in government circles. Nem con. However, anyway, that's her contention. She repudiates the child entirely. She says she is no more responsible for it than if it had been left on her doorstep, and there is, therefore, no reason why she should put up with, or be expected to put up with, the wrecking of her life or her work on account of it." This kind of depth of looking at the problems is what I think Wyndham does really well throughout this. What an incredible question. Are any of these women legally responsible for these children? This was a thing that occurred to them. It brings up so many concepts, and a lot of the movies and TV shows, starting with the John Carpenter one, dealt with this by saying, no, the government would pay for them to exist and raise these children so that they could study them. But in the book itself here, the government's not doing that. The government's just kind of secretly watching them as they try to deal with this huge issue. A little later, Zellaby randomly mentions that the children should probably be killed. And I'm going to read a quote from page 114 and 115 in the Penguin. Zellaby shook his head. "I'm not ready," he said again. "But as you are a discreet woman, I will put a question to you. It is this. If you were wishful to challenge the supremacy of a society that was fairly stable and quite well weaponed, what would you do? Would you meet it on its own terms by launching a probably costly and certainly destructive assault? Or, if time were of no great importance, would you prefer to employ a version of a more subtle tactic? Would you, in fact, try somehow to introduce a fifth column to attack it from within?" And here we get the idea that this is an alien invasion. After this, Zellaby starts studying the children and teaching the children, and really becomes kind of their main teacher. And he realizes that if you teach one of the boys something and then go to another of the boys, they will already automatically know that thing. And if you do it with the girls, it's the same. So what Zellaby decides is there's two alien entities that are the boys is one of them and the girls is the other one. And he calls them Adam and Eve, basically these two alien entities, because the children do not have autonomy, really. Once one of them knows something, they all know it. And this isn't really apparent yet, but as they grow, it becomes impossible for the parents to be able to tell them apart. They look so much alike. It's basically just like one male alien in many bodies and one female alien in many bodies. Why he didn't just make it one entity, I don't know. That's something that could be interesting topic for conversation. Why did he feel like he had to split the sexes for this story instead of just making them all one alien entity? After this, the narrator and Janet move away, and that is the end of part 1. So part 2 happens with 8 years having passed. The children are all now, I think, 9 or 10, but they all look like and act like they're 16 years old. They're growing so rapidly. But Richard has been away for these 8 years, and he meets Bernard, and Bernard says, "Hey, I'm just going into Midwich. There's some stuff going on. Why don't you accompany me?" And he does. It allowed us to jump a lot of time so that the story could continue on from Richard's perspective. So he goes into this legal meeting, and basically what's happened is the children were walking down the road, and this young man was driving through town, and they walked out into the road, and he, terrified, was like, "Oh no, I got to get around them." So he went around them, but he couldn't turn fast enough, and he clipped one of them on the hip with his car, which threw the kid across. And the children reacted by forcing him to drive into a wall and kill himself. And basically the committee finds that he was driving kind of crazy and hit one of the kids and tried to speed away and killed himself that way. But the town knows what really happened, and the town's getting really tired and terrified of these children. Right after this, the brother of the person that died in the car, being angry that no justice was shown to his brother, hides behind a bush and shoots one of the children. And Richard and Bernard watch as the children force this guy to take his own life with his gun. So everything is really coming to a head with these children. And Zellaby, still being the old academic that he is trying to figure out why the children react so extreme to everything. If somebody, nicks him with a car, they force that person to die in a car accident. He feels like they always go to the extreme. And when he talks to the children about this, they openly admit that it is to teach a lesson. It is the quickest way to make sure that behavior doesn't happen again. And we get this concept, we don't see a lot of the children, but we get this concept that they are almost emotionless. So the town forms a mob, and the mob goes to the Grange where the children are now living. The children all moved out of their parents' houses and went to the Grange to live by themselves. And a mob goes out to kill them, and the children force them all to fight, basically with murderous intent, to fight each other. And a couple of people do die in this fight. And a cop shows up that is from another town that doesn't know what's going on in Midwich and is questioning the children. And he has this very macho bravado, like, "You look at me when I'm talking to you" type of stuff. And the children, mess with his brain in this terrifying way that really shocks Bernard. He's really kind of disgusted with how the children work after that. At which point we get, for me, what I think is the crux of the concept of the twist of this novel, that I just really, really love John Wyndham's take on this concept. And I've noticed in a lot of the TV shows, this is not a twist. This information comes up much sooner. But in the book, we're near the end when this finally comes up. So what we learn is that Midwich wasn't the only place where this occurred. And the whole time I'd just been thinking that it was this one random place. But of course it happened at different points around the globe. And in most places, the women and children were either immediately killed because, of course, they were born, pale with white hair in places where the mothers were not, or the fathers were not pale with white hair. So immediately they were seen as others and killed. And then in Australia, all the children die within like 10 hours because something must not have gone well. But there was one in Russia where the children survived, but like a week or a few weeks before, the Russians had bombed the entire town with the kids and everybody in it with this nuke that they were able to fling like 60 miles. And they were able to destroy the children, but of course they had to destroy all civilian life in the town as well. And we realized that the extreme reaction that these kids were suddenly having in Midwich is because they could tell when the Russians were killed. So they suddenly realized they are the only ones left and that they must survive at all costs. And at this point we get a conversation between Zellaby and the children that is absolutely incredible, and it is the crux of the entire novel. So right away, the children, Zellaby's having a conversation, I think with just one of them, but all of them, of course. And the children are like, look, here's the deal. We are going to dominate the humans. We're going to. Your only choice is to kill us. That is the only choice you have. So we expect you to want to kill us, but we want to survive. We're in kind of a bad situation because we are too young to start doing what we need to do in order to dominate mankind. So we are going to protect ourselves to the best that we can. I think right before the conversation starts, there's a plane that's about to fly over Midwich. And the boy that he's talking to makes it crash, but right before it crashes, the pilot jumps out, and Zellaby says, "Why didn't you just turn him around?" And he says, "Because that wouldn't send a message. Like this sends a message. We are going to defend ourselves." And he said the most interesting thing about all of this is that your ethics make it very difficult for you to do what the Russians did. You can't just blow up this town and all the civilians in it. There's no way. Whatever political party is in power that does that will be overthrown, will be destroyed. You can't just kill civilian lives like that. And it was this really interesting look at like Russian, what the British thought of Russian morality versus British morality in 1957, right? Cold War. But the best thing about it is that I don't feel like Wyndham puts one above the other, because the British obviously have the higher moral ground in the sense that they're not just going to willy-nilly kill civilians, right? But they are putting the entire human race at risk because of that moral belief. So the Russians are terrible because they'll kill civilians, but they've already taken care of the cuckoo problem. So they discuss this in great detail, and it's really, this conversation is worth the book alone. Really wonderful. And then the children present an ultimatum to Zellaby. They say, look, here's the deal. We're going to go to somewhere isolated where we can grow and get to the point that we can dominate the humans. And you're going to help us do that. The government is going to help us do that because they can't kill us because of their morals and their ethics. So that's the plan. They're using the population as a shield, and they say, okay, we need airplanes. So tell your government to get us airplanes. And Zellaby's like, I'll go talk to him. I can't really guarantee anything, but I'll go talk to him. And then as they're leaving, the kid's like, we're still going to, I don't know if the kid says this actually. But anyway, there's a lecture later. Zellaby goes up to the Grange and teaches the kids. So after this huge conversation, he comes down with his ultimatum. It doesn't go very well. And Zellaby's like, okay, well, the next day he's like, I gotta go and teach the kids at the Grange. And his wife's like, why on earth are you going up to the Grange? That's ridiculous. These kids are crazy. So Zellaby, a few weeks earlier, had learned that this heart condition he had was probably going to be fatal and pretty dang soon. So he's going to go teach the children one last time. And he tells his wife, hey, when you go into town, will you get me a box of bullseye, which is a type of candy, bullseye candies. And earlier, there was a point when Zellaby was taking a walk, and one of the children stopped him from going, and he's like, hey, come on, show me a little bit of respect. You know I walk this route every day. And the kid's like listening to the other children, the one mind, hive mind thing. But the child pokes Zellaby in the face with a bullseye candy. And this is a final stroke of brilliance by John Wyndham. So his wife's like, why are you getting him a box of bullseyes? And he says, because they love him. They love him and they expect them. And Zellaby goes up to the Grange to start lecturing them. And he has a bunch of equipment that he needs to unload with a screen and everything so that they can record it. And in all that, he has slipped a bomb, a huge bomb, and he blows up the kids with this huge bomb and himself. Which is, of course, the ending that it had to be. There was no moral way to deal with this. First off, the brilliance of this alien species to have these children, their children first, and their children that we birth and love. It's a really terrifying concept. And the last thing that John Wyndham did that was really brilliant is he made them children, right? In between all their insane, intelligent, emotionless talk, they all really love bullseye candy. And Zellaby's the only person they trust, the only person they respect because of his intelligence and what they've taught him. In their own way, they love Zellaby, or as close to love as they can get. And Zellaby takes advantage of that in order to destroy them, to finish the cuckoo problem. It's really, really a fantastic ending, and the only ending the story could have. I mean, it was either that or they invade, right? That's the conundrum that they talk about, Zellaby and the alien intelligence at the end, where it's just like, look, we're going to try to dominate your species. You have to kill us. That's the only way any of this is going to work out. It's how survival works. And it even goes into these concepts that everything above that concept of survival that the Russians just lobbed a bomb at, everything above that is society put on top of animal instinct, and that in this specific case, the animal instinct is absolutely what was needed. You need to protect your species by destroying any other or anything different. It is a wild, wild book. It really is. And the kind of love that Zellaby feels at the end when he's blowing them up, and the love that the children have for him, makes it kind of sad and just really, really well told. If you've watched all this and you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. It is absolutely incredible. It really is. The philosophy in this, I have barely scratched the surface of. There is so much more, and it really, really is worth a read. Wyndham's new to me, but I will be reading more of his in the future, and I'm very much looking forward to it. So yeah, give this one a look and see what you think. Thank you guys very much for watching this. If you liked it, click like. If you like this kind of content, please click subscribe, because we'll be making a lot more of it in the future. Thank you so much for watching.